Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. One of the biggest challenges, or the biggest challenge that the youth face today with regards to being righteous, being upright and steadfast, etc. It's a difficult question. From my experiences, I would say from those biggest challenges is just the disconnection between father and son, mother and daughter. Whether it's because of language barrier, culture, just different generation, old school, new school. And I would say that most of the youth, they complain that their fathers or their mothers are either unwilling to listen to them or incapable of listening to them and understanding them. My father doesn't really care. Whether that's correct or incorrect, but this is what they say. Or my father really doesn't have the time. Or my father just doesn't understand me. And he thinks that I'm living in the 80s or the 70s or the 60s. Or with regards to Muslims who migrated from other countries, the youth, they complain. I won't mention the brother's name, it happened just today. Allah is my witness, I'm not lying or exaggerating. The brother, he says, you're the first imam I ever met that is accessible, that you can talk, you can express yourself, you're cool, you're humble, and you understand us. He says, I'm from such and such a country, my mother's from such and such a country. He says, all of the imams in my masjid, in my community, they do the entire khutbah in a different language. He says, and none of the youth understand that original language, none of them. He says, and every week they do the same thing, and they talk about the same politics and the political strife in the original country. So the guy basically was about, strangling me, giving me a bear hug, hugging me, kissing me, subhanAllah, I'm so happy to meet you. So the point is that oftentimes it may be an issue of language, it may be an issue of culture, it may be an issue of an age, or it may be an issue of, unfortunately, some of the parents, they just may be too busy, or just, one reason or another, the connection is broken. So then the children, they begin to starve and look for love and attention in other places. And then there's gangs, drugs, internet, girlfriends, so on and so forth, etc. So I would say this is from the greatest reasons behind the youth not being connected, people not wanting to connect to them. I remember when I was younger, oftentimes some older brothers would push you away from the masjid for one reason or another. Or those who wanted to connect with youth, but they just didn't know how, which is not necessarily a sin. And it's not necessarily something which is blameworthy. However, if you are incapable of performing a task properly, then you must relinquish it to someone else. And that's the next problem with the original generation of the Muslims, whether they're indigenous Muslims, Muslims who come from another country. If you can't communicate with the youth, you're unwilling, incapable, then you have to find someone who is. And Allah knows best.
Jazakallah khair. And definitely parent and child relationships are extremely important. And as young people, we have to realize that friends, they come and go, but the people that you can truly rely on, at the end of the day, when you're facing challenges or going through hardships, and when no one is around to support you, right, your family is always there, right? But at the same time, as parents, we have to be a little bit more involved in our children's life and stop allowing, the internet or social media to actually raise our children. Inshallah ta'ala, hopefully, we can build stronger relationships with our parents or with our children. Next question we're going to direct to Dr. Hatem. I know earlier in the Zakat workshop, you were speaking about establishing institutions that can basically continue to develop, the efforts of the Muslims here in the United States of America. Can you elaborate on some of the institutions that are extremely important for us to actually start establishing outside of course, masajid or Islamic schools?
Alhamdulillah, salatu wassalamu ala Rasulullah. All of the activities, all of the da'wah activities will need da'wah and other activities, the activities that the Muslim community needs, all of the things that all of the needs of our community as a community. If we can talk about senior homes, we can talk about having an orphanage, for instance, in central Jersey that will serve the Muslim community, like 4 or 5 masajid can come together and start an institution or start like an organization. I'm talking about institutionalizing the work, the activities. So whatever activities, relief, social services, civic engagement, interfaith, all of the activities that we need as a Muslim community to start institutions and to build institutions that have good, efficient processes, transparent as well, that will earn the trust of the community, and the community will, many people within our community. I was approached just 2 days ago by a brother that is a trustworthy brother. Sometimes people like to talk. Some people, are serious when they talk. That they are truthful and serious. So he said that we would like to have a higher learning institute here in New Jersey, in the tri-state area. And I am willing, we have a group of people that are willing to fund this, and we're willing to, and I'm not talking about, he said, I'm not talking about $5 or $10 million. I'm talking about serious funding. Yeah. So there are people within in our community, there are Muslims in our communities or communities that are willing to support institutions of various orientations and for various causes, but they just want to make sure that they will be efficient, competent, transparent, and so on. And I think that we have to capitalize on that interest, and one day, inshallah, we will be able to.
Inshallah. And so we definitely like to get Dr. Brown involved in the conversation. And being a man of academia, professor at Georgetown University, we do have a question in regards to the education materials that are taught in Islamic schools. So the question is posed as, should Islamic schools use textbooks or mainstream biology textbooks as instructional materials, right? But at the same time, try to, how can they actually balance between the information that may be in opposition of the teachings of Islam, right? So what should, the educational institutions do to kind of clarify these mistakes, inshallah ta'ala?
I have no idea. I don't know. I wish I knew the answer to that question, but I graduated from high school in 1996, and I don't know what books people use for science. I got a 2 on the AP chemistry exam. I don't know. My grandfather was a chemist, but no, I don't know the answer. I wish I was able to help you, but I feel bad.
It's outside of just like the books of science, but also like books of history at the same time. Myself being a teacher at Islamic schools, you see a lot of, things that contradict, our very, basic beliefs in Islam. So a history book, for example, world history book, they make it seem that, shirk was first in existence. And then when Abraham came along, this was the introduction of monotheism, right? Or the concept of attributing everything to like Mother Nature. What suggestions would you have for educators, like myself, or Islamic institutions, where we can actually begin, this process of, maybe establishing something that will supplement this information or that contradicts our beliefs?
I think it's, I don't know how to do this with young kids, but I think that the way that I would approach this is to make it very clear that anything you read about something like history or society is coming from a certain perspective and has certain assumptions and is pushing a certain worldview, right? And I think that the sooner you teach children this, the better able they will be to be aware of when they're being manipulated, or what kind of where the background of their thinking is coming from. I think in a sense, you can, it puts a little more onus on the teacher, because the teacher is is not relying on the book. They are more using the book as a teaching tool, where the book becomes not just a piece of place to get information, but becomes a piece of evidence itself for how certain worldviews are being promulgated. So that's what I would suggest. And usually in the United States, that's seen as like a stage for, you learn history and then you learn about how history is written.
Yes.
But I think that way will inevitably leave students with certain, like as I said, kind of background assumptions about the nature of reality, and that's not what you want. You want them to understand from the very beginning that they're going to be confronted by claims about reality that are not theistic, that are naturalistic, that are based on, say, the idea of progress and all these things. And so you just want them to be aware of that from the very beginning.
Yes. Now, maybe this is, one of the institutions that we definitely have to actually develop, is more education institutions that actually support our Islamic schools, such as Islamic Board of Education, where, we can, come together and kind of, create supplemental materials that offsets, this particular type of thinking, right? So that, our teachers are prepared to actually, handle these issues head on when they come across or have to teach these type of topics, when they're actually teaching these topics, within their classroom. So let's get the sisters involved. We had a question from the brother side. Do we have a question from the sisters? All right, first hand up, we'll get the question, inshallah. Any questions from the sisters? All right, no questions from the sisters. Another question from the brothers, inshallah. Tafaddal.
I grew up in New Jersey, but the problem was I'm from a religious family. But as I was going to high school, I was lost. I got lost by the American dream, and I was basically I was in a sinful life. I was going to clubs, I was going to...
You're talking to the mic closer to your mouth.
So basically, I was just lost in American life, and I was away from the deen. Eventually, after I got to consequences, and I was being convicted for something, and then when I was in prison, that's when I realized I started reading the Quran, understanding the Quran, and that's when I started changing my life. So my question is, how can we, our young generation who are lost like that, how can we approach them before actually it's too late, or before they get convicted, or they do something really wrong? How can we approach them a proper way to become to the, basically love deen, understand Islam more better?
Wait, so the question is, how do we get kids to
basically
read the
how
Quran
can
more?
how can we keep them away from troubles?
Oh yeah. Give them money.
All right, don't give them money, huh? But they'll definitely find ways to get in trouble. So one of the mashayikh, inshallah, can address that question of how to take a proactive approach in preventing our young people from getting caught up in this world, and also getting caught up in things that may cause them that will lead them to imprisonment or detention on the juvenile level.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. Thank you very much for your question. I would say that it's no one solution. There is no one or two pills that you just take. But I think that it needs an entire lifestyle. An entire lifestyle. First and foremost is your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How connected are you to your Lord? Do you ask Allah to protect your children from evil? Okay. Secondly is, how do you take care of your children? Have you put them in the necessary environments to learn and to be around positivity? Your income. Is your income pure? Is it pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Or is your income displeasing to Allah and impure? Do you feed your children from haram that has an effect upon them? As we say, you are what you eat. Okay, and the Prophet ﷺ, he warns us against ill-gotten means and nourishing the body from those ill-gotten means. Also, as was mentioned, how generous are you to your children? Dr. Brown said, give them money. In other words, many times children, teenagers, they fall into things because they're lacking. My father doesn't give me attention, as we just mentioned, or time, or love, or I don't have enough money, so I go to the streets, or I go to the television screen or the phone, and the problem, and the list goes on, all right? So in my humble opinion, there isn't no one solution, but it's a whole entire lifestyle. Before the child is even conceived, when a child is young, all the way up until the child is grown and leaves your home, it's a constant struggle that the parent has to make, all right? And you know, every child is different, every child is unique. Talk to your child based off of their intelligence and based off of their personality. You can speak to them logically. Some children just need, to be woken up, to be reminded. Discipline. There is no one specific solution. You understand? And like you just mentioned about yourself, talk to your child about your own experiences. And tell your child or tell your teenage son or teenage daughter what you think is fun, what you think is cool and hip. I've been there and I've done that. It's a dead end. You don't want to go this route. You don't want to be with this person. Trust me, it looks fun now, but it'll end up in a miserable way for you. And tell them about your own experiences. And most importantly is, don't force the child. Don't impose upon the child. Offer the child the correct way and warn them from the incorrect way. Pray that Allah Azza wa Jalla keeps the child safe from going towards the incorrect path. And if they do, that Allah Azza wa Jalla will gently bring them back. And oftentimes parents, when they speak to their children, the first thing that the parents think and feel that the child isn't listening. And that's not always the case. Sometimes they are listening, but the response, and they don't necessarily jump when you say jump. All right? When I was younger, my parents, they told me many things, and I didn't necessarily listen to them immediately. But as I got older, I benefited tremendously from their wisdom, from their discipline, or from certain things that they would say to me. So what's important is give it time. The flower needs time to blossom and to grow by itself. Provide the sunlight, put it in good, clean soil, provide it with the water, and put the rest with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Don't force and don't impose the child, especially when they're getting older in puberty. What's important is, there are many lectures and books, some that we have done and others, with regards to Tarbiyya al-Islamiyya, the proper Islamic way of raising children, from little tiny babies to adolescents to teenagers, and the list goes on. Perhaps you can go back to some of those lectures and inshallah get the full detail. Obviously time is limited, it's a panel, other speakers. That's inshallah hopefully shedding some light, bidhnillah, and Allah knows best.
Right, and again, definitely the lines of communication have to be open all the time. Whether you're encouraging your young child or you're actually disciplining them, but that communication has to be open, and never underestimate the power of dua. Never underestimate the power of dua. Our next question is in regards to husband and wife relations. And we'd like Dr. Hatem to address this particular question in regards to a wife wearing or not wearing the hijab. Can the husband actually force, the wife to wear hijab or anything related to Islam? And will the husband or he says / father will be held accountable for anything wrong or sin that the wife or the daughter may commit?
Well, the husband, you're asking if the husband is supposed to force his wife to wear hijab?
Yes, or a daughter, or a father forcing the daughter.
It depends on what you mean by force. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَأْمُرْ أَهْلَكَ بِالصَّلَاةِ يَصْطَبِرْ عَلَيْهَا. Command your family, ahlak, your family, that would include your spouse and would include your child, to pray and be consistent with it, be patient, persevere. So I think that this is as far as as much as we can do. You would continue to exhort, to remind, to preach, to teach, to encourage, to command, but beyond this, I don't know how you would enforce it beyond this. But the thing is, what you need to do is you need to also show your displeasure every once in a while. Like it's not like, why don't you pray? And then like a few months later, I'm not seeing you pray. Why don't you pray? You will have to really show your displeasure. You'll have to really show that this is something that you're concerned for their safety, for their spirituality, for their relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and their religious commitment, and that you're also displeased. It is not like you're going to be morbid all the time, but it will not just be an occasional, why don't you pray, or why don't you wear hijab every once in a while.
Now, would the father or the husband be held accountable? I mean, even if the daughter or the wife is rebellious in wearing the hijab, or
I think he would be held
hijabs?
accountable if he neglected his obligation to command them to obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that's as much as what he can do. Like لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها. Allah does not burden a soul beyond its capacity. So I think that if he's doing this and he's doing it sincerely, then he will not be held accountable for what they decide to do.
Jazakallah khair. Our next question is actually directed towards Dr. Brown, and is in particular to, or hadith in particular to, some of the characteristics of women. And this is a particular hadith that's got me in trouble a couple of times, throughout my marriage, and I learned not to use it much. But this is the hadith in regards to the claim that the woman is intellectually inferior to the man, or that the woman is deficient in intellect as well as religion. So a person being fond of the sciences of hadith, can you interpret this hadith or explain this hadith in the best way possible?
Well, I guess first I'll kiss myself goodbye. And so the hadith, it's in Sahih Bukhari and other collections. There's several narrations of it, but the general, some of the context differs. But in generally, right, the Prophet, alayhi salam, he sees a group of women, and he says that they should give money in charity because he's seen that the majority of the people in hellfire are women. And then it also says that you're naqisat aql wa deen. You're deficient in aql, which is sometimes translated as reason, sometimes intellect, sometimes translated as self-restraint, and in religion. And then some of the ladies ask, in what aspect, in what respect are we? So there's different versions, but I'm going to conflate them, right? And one says that, well, is your testimony not equal to half that of a man? And is do you not pray, when you're menstruating? Yes. And then the Prophet asks, why are you, why are most of us, or why are the majority of people in hellfire women? And he says, tukthirna al-li'an wa tukthirna al-ashir. You curse a lot and you deny your husbands their due credit, right? So they ask, he says, if your husband is good to you for a long time, but then you see one thing you don't like from him, you say, I've never seen anything good from you. So it's a kind of, these two different reports are sort of, sometimes they're joined together, sometimes they're distinct, as far as I remember. So I mean, the one part of the hadith is not, I don't think, controversial. People, well, it is controversial. People say, well, why are there more women in hellfire than men? My response to this is, unless there's exactly the same amount of women in hell as there are in men, then there's going to be more than one or the other, and either it's going to be more women or it's going to be more men. You also have to understand what the purpose of this hadith is, that the Prophet ﷺ is speaking to women in a way to motivate them to improve their conduct. So when he speaks to men, he speaks to them about things that motivate their conduct. He says, that there's nothing I've left behind you more dangerous than women. And probably a lot of men right now, like Harvey Weinstein, would say that's correct. Now, it's not women's fault, obviously, but what it means is that men are weak in regard to women. Men's desire and men's egos show themselves and manifest themselves around the issue of sexuality, around the issue of women. So if you take that advice, if you were Harvey Weinstein, you probably would not be in the position you were in, and he's in now. Okay, so that's good advice. Some people might think it's sexist. I think it's him speaking to women in a way that tries to get them to reform aspects of their bad conduct, at least at the time of the Prophet. Maybe today women don't tell their husbands, who are really nice to them all the time, when they see something they don't like, "You've never done anything good for me." Or maybe they do, I don't know. This has to be answered by a specialist in this area. The second part about intellect and religion, I mean, this part is, people find very disturbing. There's a couple of different options, I guess. If students ask me about this, is one possibility is that, one possibility is the Prophet is being playful. I mean, I think this is important, right? When we read hadiths, we're conditioned by the way that we think about the issue. Like when we think about something gender, we get very serious because we're sexism, male chauvinism, et cetera, et cetera. But it may be the case that the Prophet is like being playful because saying naqas aql wa din and then bringing up these two things that are not really examples of insufficiency in intellect and religion. The fact that women don't pray when they're menstruating is not deficiency in religion. So, one possibility is this is almost like teasing the women. The other possibility is that, these are just different interpretive possibilities. The other possibility is that just saying women are deficient in intellect and religion, and that's, there's no mystery to it. And then finally, the last possibility, which I think is very interesting from a perspective of study of gender historically, is that aql specifically is like a male construct. So what that means is that, I've always noticed, not that I agree, but I've noticed that when men get together, they will pretty quickly start talking about how unreasonable various women are in their lives. Has anyone ever noticed this? No? Just me? Only my friends do this? Okay. I've noticed this as a pattern. I disagree, obviously. But men will always say women are really unreasonable. It's just unreasonable. Why don't they just listen to, my wife came and told me she has a problem. I told her to solve the problem. She still got upset at me, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, if you read books on relationships, like Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, they always say women don't want you to be reasonable. They want you to listen. They want to tell you what's wrong with they don't want you to solve their problems. They just want you to listen to their problems and vent. Don't try and always be problem solving. So I think one possibility is that, this notion of reason or self-restraint is specifically, it's a construct that men talk about. And because human society is patriarchal, right? So all human societies that we know of in history have been patriarchies. There's been no matriarchies, just this Wonder Woman island. I didn't see the movie. But so because the terms of discourse, because our language is set by men, that male constructs become seen as kind of dominant constructs. And so in this sense, a woman being deficient in aql is like a man saying, you're not like a man. But obviously she's not like a man because she's not a man. So I mean, that's another possibility. But I think that to be honest, I mean, I've never, like Ibn Hajar says about one hadith in the Sahih Bukhari, ما وجدت ما يزيل هذا الإشكال حتى الآن. I haven't found an understanding of this that would be somehow remove all the doubts and the confusion about it. Until those are just different perspectives on it.
Jazakallah khair. And while we're still on the topic of husband and wife relations, we know that we have a huge issue or epidemic that is happening in our communities, and that is the issue of divorce. And the issue of custody. Who has more rights to the child? Does the husband has more rights to the child, or does the mother or the wife has more rights to the child? So Mufti Muneer, if you'd like to, talk about this topic briefly in regards to custody over the children. Who has more rights over the children and after divorce happens?
With regards to child custody and the widespread problem of divorce and a high divorce rate, and it's not just in America or in Western countries. You read the statistics, you'll be shocked and scared in the Far East and in the Middle East as well. Divorce is a huge problem, and fighting over the children is another problem as well. In general, the people of knowledge, they say that the whole purpose of child custody, which is not necessarily an accurate translation of the concept in the traditional books of Islam, al-hidana. And the word hidana is originally extracted from a bird sitting on top of her eggs, okay, incubation or taking care of the nest. That's where the word comes from, al-hidn, which is a part of the body, whether it's a woman's hip, a woman's flank, or a man's hip and a man's flank, meaning the baby being kept close, being kept warm, and being protected. So the word hidana means much more than just custody. Custody is who takes the child. Obviously, from the requirements of those who take the child, looking after the child, educating the child, etc. But it's much deeper than that. And oftentimes you misunderstand the concept by misunderstanding the actual terminology. So with that being said, the people of knowledge, they say that the one who is most suited for the task of the spiritual, physical, and mental development and protection of the child deserves the child the most. The one who's most capable, the one who's most able, the one who's most suited to look after the child's spirit, the soul, the deen, tarbiyah, and also the child's mind, giving the necessary development of the child's mind, and also protecting the child from anything which will pollute, corrupt, and cause major type of illness or distortion to the child's mind. Last but not least, less important is the physical upbringing of the child. So, sometimes that's the father, the ex-husband, the man. Other times it's the woman, the mother, the ex-wife. Sometimes in the Islamic court system, the qadi, he may, or even in the secular court system, they may say, no, it's the aunt, or the uncle, or someone that isn't related. So, there are theoretical principles, yes. There are narrations in which the Prophet ﷺ was clearly asked and specifically asked with regards to divorce and the problem of divorce. When a woman said that I used to look after this child, I used to feed him, breastfeed the child was on my lap, the child was on my hip, I look after the child, and the father has divorced me. And the way that she worded in the hadith as if he did it in an inconsiderate way. I was a good wife, a loyal wife, and he divorced me. And then injury to insult. After he divorced me, فَأَرَادَ أَنْ يَنْتَزِعَهُ أو أَنْ يَنْتَزِعَ وَلَدِي مِنِّي. Now he wants to snatch my child from me. The Prophet ﷺ, he informed her, he says, أَنْتِ أَحَقُّ بِوَلَدِكِ مَا لَمْ تَنْكِحِي أو كما قال عليه الصلاة والسلام. He says, you deserve your child the most as long as you don't remarry. And we have other narrations that speak about the Prophet ﷺ giving the child the choice and the option who they want to live with. Whether it's at the age of 5, at the age of 7, and the list goes forward. The point I'm trying to get to is one point, brothers and sisters, and that is is that there are theoretical principles, rulings, default rulings for who deserves the child, who deserves the custody at the time of divorce. And obviously the scholars of Islam, just like they differ on issues of prayer, purification, hajj, this and that, they differ on these issues as well. Some of the scholars of Islam say the mother deserves the child the most. Other scholars, they may say, no, the father. And other details. Those are the theoretical principles. But in a land in which Islam is taught and practiced, and it's not a secular and nominal society, the judge, the Islamic judge, the qadi, he's going to meet them, sit with them, look in them, look towards them. He's going to investigate, and he's going to figure out who is most suited to take care of the child. And it may not be the mother. The mother may be unsuited. She has a good religion, but she doesn't have the necessary wealth. The father has the wealth to take care of the child, but he has a bad religion. Everybody understand this? So it has to be details. Now, obviously, living in America or Canada or the UK or Australia or any Western country, the system of Islamic courts, that's an issue in itself. You go to the civil courts, obviously their scales and their ways of judgment are sometimes parallel with those of Islam, and sometimes they aren't. Everybody understand this? So if the Muslims, the man and the woman, the wali, the father, if they can't sit down with respect and with honor and sit down and have an objective discussion. All right, look, we're not here to throw food at each other or throw mud at each other. My son was married to your daughter, so on and so forth. That's done now. Who was wrong, who oppressed who, that's done. Now we have a child or we have children. Let's sit down as, first and foremost, Muslims, adults who have brains, who have hearts, and let's figure out what is best for the child. Spite, pride, ego, hurt, and all of these emotions and elements, let's try our best to put them to the side. Not because I like you or you like me, not because your son didn't beat up my daughter or my daughter didn't cheat on your son, no, but for the purpose of the child. To be objective for the benefit of the child. Just like an imam of a masjid, he is not there for his own personal emotions and feelings. He's there to benefit the community, to serve the community. And the moment you get caught up in your own personal ups and downs and you lose focus on what you're there for, there's going to be major problems as we see today. So the child comes first and the child comes last. It's better for you to take the child, even though it's my child and I want him to be with me, but I don't have a steady job, or my religion is not that good, or I travel too much, or I have major problems, I have mental issues, and the list goes on. So therefore, in brief, guys, there are principles which, yes, the general rule, 1 + 1 = 2, the woman keeps the child, especially when the child is young. The child needs to be fed. The woman has an incredible and amazing ability to deal with children unlike men. Allah tells us in the Quran, وَلَيْسَ الذَّكَرُ كَالْأُنثَى. Male is not like the female. And this verse is not just talking about one child. This is universal. Men have certain talents and abilities. Women have certain talents and abilities. Just like the discussion of the hadith about a woman being deficient in intellect and being deficient in her religion. Dr. Brown, he gave some important points and some beneficial points with regards to men are not women, women are not like men. And the Prophet ﷺ, he emphasized the concept of gender role. And he cursed men who imitate women, and he cursed women who imitate men. So therefore, women, they have certain abilities to deal with children that men don't have, and vice versa. Certain things that women just can't do that men can do. Obviously, it's relative. Some people, they play both roles, but one of the two is always going to be some type of major deficiency. So therefore, there are theoretical rules, yes. The child goes with the mother, stays with the mother. The child is young, still breastfeeding, before the age of 7, 10, 12, remarried. There are rules, but every situation is different. And if you cannot handle this in the Islamic court, then the least least that you can do, bid'nillahi ta'ala, is go to your local imam, your respectable resident scholar, and sit down and be willing to listen to his advice. To sit down and be willing to take the advice of someone who's knowledgeable, learned, experienced, and most importantly, impartial. Hopefully, and Allah knows best.
Jazakallah khair. And just to re-emphasize, that the relationship doesn't cancel out, upon divorce with your child. So even though one person may get the custody of a child or is better suited for the custody or raising the child, both parents still, have to be involved in the life of their children. A lot of times what happens in many communities that, the mother may get custody over the child and the father, has no relationship, with his child whatsoever, or vice versa, because, the two individuals, they are unable to get along. And therefore, because these two individuals are unable to get along, right, it actually affects the child. Excuse me. Dr. Hatem, we have a question addressed to you in regards to the issue of race. In your opinion, why is this issue of race such a controversial topic? And why do people subjugate themselves to groups when the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ advised us not to do so?
When the Prophet
Advised us not to do so, to divide ourselves into racial groups or nationalistic groups, and so forth and so on.
Alhamdulillah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Would you allow me just to make like a clarification?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Maybe Sheikh, the sisters will be get a little anxious because he said that if she has the deen but she does not have the wealth, and he has the opposite, then maybe he will be able to take care of the child. But like they may get a little anxious because he is responsible anyway financially for the child, whether or not she has physical custody. So if she does not have the wealth and she has the deen, the Islamic court will force him to spend on his child and support his child, and will give the physical custody to her.
Naam, Jazakallah khairan. Without a question, even if the child remains with the mother, the father has the obligation of spending upon the child. Rather, with regards to suckling or feeding the child, the father has to pay as well and support the woman relatively as well. So that's not to be misunderstood. If the mother has the custody of the child, or if the child is living with her, the father still is supposed to provide the financial maintenance, even in that situation. If the child is physically living with the mother, whether it's 101%, he's paying for everything, whatever they agree upon, but the default ruling is that the father is supposed to be the breadwinner, yes. So that's not to be misunderstood.
And I wanted also to just, I know that the men will hate me for this, but sisters, you also deserve compensation for the custody from the father, according to the majority, except for the Malikis. But Hanafis, Shafi'is, and Hanbalis, as long as you're not married and you're taking care of the children, not only that he is required to spend on the children, but he's required to pay you compensation for taking care of the children and the physical custody of the children. Certainly, we will have to be reasonable, and if you're going out and if you're both having full-time jobs, you and the father, and sharing custody and so on, then things will have to be, then justice is the principle that we will have to respect in this case, and it will not be unfair in this case to say to the man that you have to pay her, compensate her for her physical custody of her own children. But in the past, in Islamic courts, you also could go and ask for compensation for the physical custody that you have taken from him by the court order. Anyway. And then I just, for the sisters also, and I know that the answer of Dr. Brown was perfect, but from an intellectual perspective. And I also want to tell you one more thing, which is, does anyone here have any doubt that Khadija radiallahu anha, not Khadija, not Fatima, Aisha, not Aisha, Ayman, Salama, Atiyya, Rubayya, all of those women, does anyone have any doubt that any of those women is much better and much more religious and much more pious and much wiser than all of the men in this room? Combined.
Absolutely.
Probably combined. I don't have doubt that Khadija is wiser and more pious than all of the men in this room. I don't have any doubt about this. So why do you have to be so focused on the sort of group-to-group comparison? If this is not about you as an individual, this is not saying that your husband is more pious or wiser than you, because maybe he's not. Oftentimes, like a lot of times, you don't find that to be true. In Muslim countries, I remember in Egypt, in the 60s, in the 50s, in Egypt, Islam survived by those, through those pious, good women who took good care of that generation, because men during those times were so removed from the religion, detached from the religion. Had it not been for those women, my generation, the previous generation, would have not made it. And Islam survived because of those women. So don't, yes, at the end of the day, Adam and Nuh and Ibrahim and Isa and Musa and Muhammad alayhim afdal salatu wassalam were all men. But that's it. Just maybe men as a group will have that edge because, yes, all of those were men. But if it is about the individual, don't worry about it. You may be a lot more pious and a lot wiser than your husband. So it's not comparing individual to individual here. Allah barik fiki.
So,
should we stop here? The race issue, there is, everybody knows this stuff in Islam. Everybody knows about, what Islam said about not only racism, what Islam said about all forms of groupism, classism, racism, tribalism. These things do exist. We're different tribes. We're different races. We're different ethnicities. We are different groups. We could belong to different economical classes. These things exist, but they should not be, this diversity exists. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us so diverse to show, his, the majesty of his creation and the wonders of his creations. واختلاف ألسنتكم وألوانكم. The variety, the diversity of your colors, and إن في ذلك لآيات للعالمين. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created these things to show us his signs. So these things should not be used to oppress one another, should not be used to despise one another. They exist, but we are all one, we're all the children of Adam. وَآدَمْ مِنْ تُرَابٍ. There is no virtue for anyone over anyone, black over white, white over black, Arab over non-Arab, non-Arab over Arab, the hadith that is reported by Imam Ahmad. So we have to be a little bit easier about these issues. But then at the same time, these things exist, but they should not be barriers. We should not see them. We should not see the barriers. We speak different languages, we come from different cultures, we may belong to different races, but we should not see the barriers. We should break down the barriers. So when it comes to our relationship with each other as Muslims, as Muslim brothers and sisters, we should not see those differences. When we talk to each other, we're not seeing necessarily the color or any of those differences. And the masajid also should not be separated along racial, ethnic, linguistic, or any such lines. It may have been a temporary period necessary for the immigrant generation because of homesickness and their own comfort and so on. But after the immigrant generation, if we keep the masajid divided along racial, ethnic, or linguistic lines or the differences, then it will be really a problem for our community going forward.
And then we'll take a question from the audience.
question by one of the elder mothers here from the Asian subcontinent. And they do a lot of salah, dhikr, adhkar, and read a lot of Quran. And they don't have access to scholars, their English is not strong. And there's a misnomer that they read a lot of Quran, but they don't know what they're reading. And they've been told, and their education is not as, because whether it's Afghanistan, India, Pakistan, they grew up, their education is not as well as others when they immigrated here. So the question is, we read a lot of Quran, but we don't know what we're reading. Is there a benefit because there's a misnomer that there is no benefit? Or very little benefit?
So is it sufficient, with the lack of, academics, or is it sufficient just to read the Quran, even though they may not know what they're reading? Is that sufficient, for these type of individuals that may not be well educated? Inshallah. So any of the panelists can address the question. Dr. Brown?
I mean, I haven't, my answer might not be the right answer. I think that, the Quran is the word of God. And, you meet, in my travels, I've met lots of Muslims who didn't know Arabic, but who memorized, huge chunks of the Quran. And, it meant a huge amount to them. I remember one guy who was like a boat driver in Mali, just sitting here listening to him reciting the Quran, and then I recited the Quran, he recited the Quran. I mean, it was, I could just tell how much this meant to him. And I'm 99% sure he didn't know Arabic. So I think that, my answer would be, of course, there's huge value in this. I mean, you're reciting the word of God, and this means something. That action, will give you blessings, and God will, illuminate you and open your heart, I think. So that would be my answer.
One of the panelists would like to add to the question, inshallah, to the answer of Dr. Brown in regards to, benefits for just reading the Quran and not necessarily knowing the meaning.
Tayyib. I would say the Prophet ﷺ has answered the question, and the hadith that's known to all, Abdullah bin Mas'ud radiallahu anhu narrated, he said, "Man qara'a harfan min kitabillah," anyone who reads a harf, whether it's translated as a letter, a word, most commonly translated as a letter, falahu bihi hasana, and he has a good deed. And the Prophet ﷺ, he never said, "Man tadabbara, man qara'a tafsir a harf." He says, he who reads it, recites it, shall receive a hasana. And obviously he went on to explain how hasanat are multiplied and folded and flipped. One hasana has 10, and two, Allahu alam, how many hasanat a person can receive from reading one page from the Quran al-Kareem. Tayyib. So as mentioned, there's value in it. It's the word of Allah Azza wa Jal, no doubt. I would just like to add that every single Muslim doesn't have to know Arabic and learn Arabic. Every Muslim doesn't have to be a scholar or a serious student of knowledge. Every Muslim must learn the basic, rudimental, fundamental things of the religion. The basics, according to their intellect, according to the time and the place. The basics. Other than that, a person works, a person, a sister, a brother, whatever the case may be. I'm a layman Muslim, but I love to read the Quran. And when I read the Quran, I'm spiritually invigorated. And I don't understand what it means. I don't have the fiqh and the tafsir and asbab nuzul, but I know that this is Allah's words. These are Allah's words. And a person enjoys and finds sweetness and taste in the ibadah. So bidhnillahi ta'ala, it should be a balance. Seek knowledge if you can. Read hadiths, read books of tafsirs that have been simplified and summarized for the layman Muslim in many languages. But at the same time, making tasbih, making the dhikr, reading the words of Allah Azza wa Jalla without the proper meaning as well, it is a reward, a tremendous reward. But that doesn't mean that you just throw yourself to ibadah, dhikr, 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 without no type of basic fiqh. And what's meant by basic fiqh is not halal, haram, shafi'i, maliki, this and that. No, basic understanding and basic comprehension. And whenever there's knowledge, inshallah, light is not far behind. And whenever there's ignorance, darkness for surely is there. So therefore, every single Muslim has to learn the basics of his or her religion, and it's always going to be good and more positive if you can add upon the basics. Allah knows best.
And in addition to that, it's extremely important too that we recognize our academic level as well. So because someone is proficient in reading the Quran, or someone recites Quran better than another person, that doesn't necessarily give that person the authority to do their own explanation or their own tafsir of the Quran. So at the same time, we have to know our place, and we know that the Prophet ﷺ, he said, read and elevate, right, and to recite with a melody, right, just like you used to recite in this world, because your place in paradise will be the last verse, right, that you read, right? So there are many benefits, of course, of reading the Quran, but there are greater benefits to actually understand the Quran. This is just part of our development as believers. And we have time for two more questions, inshallah ta'ala. We have another individual in the back that has a question, so make sure that you speak loud or speak into the microphone.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
Okay, this question is kind of like, it's not meant to scare anyone. It's not like, as we know, as Muslims, we're supposed to be involved with the community. We're supposed to give dawah. And I've heard in many lectures that when you see fitna all around you, is it like, I'm not asking like more on the permissible side, but if everywhere you go, every single day, you see major fitna, I guess you can, like the closest word to ask is it permissible to not be too involved in the like outside community because of mixed gender gatherings like at work or any example really, but like I've heard many times that like, because as we know, Day of Judgment always gets closer and closer, but I'm wondering, is it like okay to be more at home and like stay like with your families instead of outside?
Yes.
Thank you.
So Dr. Hatem, maybe you can shed light on the question. I believe he's asking, how should we isolate isolate ourselves to the point that we are basically not involved in the world in which we live in. What is our limitations to our involvement to the outside world, and in the outside influences, the negative influences. Should we completely isolate ourselves, or is there some room for engaging the real world?
I think Dr. Brown would probably provide a better answer.
Right.
I hardly leave the house. I mean, my dream day is not leaving the house.
Yeah.
But I think it depends what stage of life you're at. I mean, there's certain, when you're a student, you have to be out and about. You have to talk to your fellow students. You have to be in work groups and things like that. I think as the different, when you get old, when you have a family, you spend a lot of time with your family, and you go, even when you're without with your family and your friends. So I guess, I would say that, to the extent that it's possible to limit, to not engage in problematic interactions, you should not engage in them. I think that for me, that's what I do. And, I don't want to engage with a lot of people around me. I don't know what the heck people do. Talk about sports and drink beer and I don't know, just this stuff. I don't want to be involved with that. I got my own, I have my own life, my family. I like to read books, but also, I think when you have children, you also have to teach your children how to deal with things.
Yes.
So you have to interact with people because you're teaching your children how to interact with people. I don't know if you're at that stage of life or not, but I mean, I think it really depends where you are. And I think that I would say that as Muslims, we also have to be aware that we're representatives, ambassadors of our religion. Maybe the only experience someone will ever have with a Muslim is with us. So you don't want to be a jerk. I try to always be polite and to be sensitive, but and understanding. But at the same time, I don't just go into like a bowling alley and go up to guys and be like, "Hey, how about them, skins or whatever." I'd rather stay at home with my kids or go walk in the park or something.
And the reality is that sometimes staying at home is more dangerous than actually going outside. With social media. And there was a hot discussion last night about social media. So yeah, Dr. Hatem, what is some advice in addition to not isolating yourself from these negative influence, but at the same time how to conduct yourself with social media, because if you're at home and you're bored, then you're going to entertain yourself with TV, with the internet, or these social media networks. So what type of balance should an individual have?
Well, I just want to say that the idea of isolating ourselves is not, it's not even possible. I certainly understand that you will have, you do have the liberty to stay away from trouble, and you do have the obligation to stay away from trouble, and you do have the obligation to stay away from problematic encounters that will compromise your religious integrity. But the idea of we're not like the Mennonites. The Mennonites are a smaller community, and they were able to basically to separate themselves to a great extent, or the Amish or the other communities that were able to separate themselves to a great extent from the larger society. But Muslims are 1.6 billion people, on this planet. And as Muslims, it's just not going to be possible that we give this advice to that large ummah to basically separate itself. And there is like a verse in the Quran, or a couple of verses in the Quran. I'll just quote this one. وَقَدْ نَزَّلَ عَلَيْكُمْ فِي الْكِتَابِ أَنْ إِذَا سَمِعْتُمْ آيَاتِ اللَّهِ يُكْفَرُ بِهَا وَيُسْتَهْزَأُ بِهَا فَلَا تَقْعُدُوا مَعَهُمْ حَتَّى يَخُوضُوا فِي حَدِيثٍ غَيْرِهِ إِنَّكُمْ إِذًا مِثْلُهُمْ إن الله جامع المنافقين والكافرين في جهنم جميعا وقد نزل عليكم في الكتاب, and he revealed to you, he sent down to you, unto you in the book, that if you hear the verses of Allah being mocked and ridiculed or rejected, that you do not sit with them until they talk about something else. يخوضوا في حديث غيره. They start another discussion. And so you had avoided, unless you were able to defend the verse, the ayat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or the verses of Allah, teachings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if you're able to talk and defend and so on, continue, sit down and defend. But if you're not going to be able to defend, and the verses of Allah or ayatullah are being mocked, withdraw until they engage in another discussion, which tells you that it is socially necessary for people to mingle with one another. Look at when the Prophet ﷺ was going to visit Sa'd ibn Ubadah radiallahu anhu when he was sick, and on his way, he had Usama with him. On his way, he stopped by a group of Muslims and Jews and mushrikeen sitting together, and when he approached them, his donkey moved the dust towards them, and Abdullah ibn Ubay ibn Salul got very irritated and started to be very offensive towards the Prophet and tell him, you stay home. Despite the fact that the Prophet approached them, gave them the greetings and everything very nicely, he said, stay home, and if someone wanted you, they will come to you. And then the Sahaba started basically like an argument erupted, but the Prophet ﷺ basically calmed everybody down and left them. He had them continue their gathering, and he left. And that group of Muslims, Jews, and mushrikeen, after Abdullah ibn Ubay ibn Salul insulted the Prophet ﷺ, what the Prophet did is that he calmed them down and then left to visit Sa'd ibn Ubadah, to visit Sa'd ibn Ubadah. I would say just immunize yourself. Certainly, there are certain times where you need a little bit of extra protection. So certain age groups will need a little bit of extra protection. If we can have Islamic schools to protect our kids in elementary, or they call them here? Elementary, right?
Yeah. Elementary, yes.
I grew up in Egypt, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Because we call junior high preparatory, and we call
yes.
high school secondary stuff. But so in earlier phases of their life, but when they go to college, they will just have to mix. But if we cannot afford to have Islamic schools, then maybe charter schools. And we really do it right, like just to be really straight and legal about it. And then if we cannot have charter schools, then our kids will go to public schools. And in this case, we will have to do our best to teach our kids how to be outward Muslims in a public school. So it varies, it depends. The different circumstances, different age groups, but we will not be able to completely withdraw. And at the same time, we do not want to assimilate in the sense of melting down.
Jazakallah khair. And to conclude, our session this evening and also the conference, to go back to the theme, hold firm to the rope, rising above the challenges of our time. In 2 minutes, we like for each panelist to give their closing nasiha, their closing advice in regards to something that we can all take, from this conference, and start applying it immediately in our lives so that we can hold firm to the rope of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that we can overcome any type of challenges or obstacles that we may face on a daily basis. So we start with Mufti, inshallah.
I would say first and foremost is to just look at the entire conference, the notes that you took, the sessions that you sat in, the recordings that you may have made with your own phone, or if they're available for sale for purchase, and just summarize the conference. Take everything that every speaker presented, and summarize it. Go over it, review it, write it down, and then compare it to your life specifically. All right. Imam Shadid, he spoke about this. Alhamdulillah, I don't have that problem. Dr. Hatem was asked a question about that. I definitely need to research more on that issue. This one, that one, so on and so forth. Because the speakers, alhamdulillah, they were in abundance, and also with a good diverse background and expertise, experience, and speciality, and this goes on. So it's more than enough that's been given in the conference. But coming to the conference, leaving the conference the same, I feel that's the problem. Coming and leaving as you came. All right, the speakers that came, they spent their time, their energy, their efforts to share with you the problems and most importantly, the solutions. So it's nothing more that you have to do except to accept it. Just take it. But you have to make sure that it fits your size, tailor-made now. Because there's certain things which are ready-made garments for certain people. I don't have this issue, I don't have that problem, I don't have this crisis, others do. So, as we say, get in where you fit in and apply the different pieces of advice, the rulings, the fatwa, the hadiths that you heard, and all of the presentations that you heard and that you saw. Try to apply them practically to your life and your specific situation, and no longer the general theoretical way. Everybody understand this? That's my advice, inshallah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah knows best.
Jazakallah khair. Dr. Brown, in the comments
I would just say that, really steel yourselves. be ready for hard times. You know, place Muslims are in this country, and the country is in general, right? I mean, you'd think like after 9/11 was the worst time, and during the Iraq War was the worst time, and you know, during the Islamophobia that started in 2010 was the worst time. But these were all hard times. But I think the worst time is when you see the effect of all that, right? So, like when you're, you know, when you get sick or something, and or, I don't know, you know, when you're running and you're sprinting and you know you're working hard, but they don't feel the pain until later, right? Now we're feeling the pain. We're seeing the effect of what this did to Muslims in this country. We're seeing what this done to Muslims in other countries. The war on terror, ISIS, all this stuff. And so, you know, you're gonna hear things from Muslims, people who are supposedly Muslims, right? You're gonna hear things that you never thought you would hear from people. You're gonna see Muslims try to normalize behavior that you never thought you'd see Muslims normalizing. Because there's been an effort for 16 years, if not longer, to turn Muslims in America into, you know, regular white bread, Protestant, liberal. So don't lose hope. لا تقنطوا من رحمة الله. And just know that if it seems like times are hard now, it's because we're feeling the pain of all the trauma that happened before.
Jazakallah khair. And you know, we definitely humbly request, you know, Dr. Hatem, you know, as our advisor here at J. Dawah and a senior, you know, scholar, to, you know, please, you know, wrap up, you know, the conference with, you know, some final words, inshallah, that we can take with us.
ربنا اغفر لنا ذنوبنا وإسرافنا في أمرنا وكفر عنا سيئاتنا وتوفنا مع الأبرار ربنا وآتنا ما وعدتنا على رسلك ولا تخزنا يوم القيامة إنك لا تخلف الميعاد ربنا اغفر لنا ولوالدينا وللمؤمنين يوم يقوم الحساب ربنا هب لنا من أزواجنا وذرياتنا قرة أعين واجعلنا للمتقين إماما ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار اللهم اغفر لجميع الحضور ولأهليهم وذويهم اللهم أصلح أحوالنا وبارك لنا في معايشنا واختم لنا بخاتمة حسنة وارزقنا رضاك قربنا إليك وارزقنا الفردوس الأعلى مع حبيبنا المصطفى صلى الله عليه وسلم وآله وأصحابه الغر الميامين وعلى التابعين بإحسان إلى يوم الدين وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين.
Jazakumullah khair again for to addressing some of the issues that we may be facing. We thank our audience for sticking out the weekend with us. Hopefully it was a definitely blessing and encouraging, you know, conference to keep us, you know, motivated. Please, you know, fill out, go to our website and do the survey online. You know, we love your feedback, you know, so that we can become better. You know, the next conference, anyone that still has, you know, pledge to fulfill, we still have pledge forms, as well as you can make a donation online, inshallah ta'ala. So until then, we will keep you posted on some of the activities that we'll be doing throughout the year, inshallah ta'ala. And this is how we will conclude our conference this evening. Jazakumullah khair.